Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for tuning in. This is the presentation for Unit 1, Lesson 5. In this presentation, we're going to be giving you your lecture notes for everything that you need to know about the foundations of government and citizenship. Let's recall that the first few lessons were about citizenship, rights and responsibilities, generations of citizenship, looking at immigration and naturalization and citizenship, and now we're going to look at some of the things that actually make citizenship and government run and function. So please let me encourage you to fill in your notes for the guided notes section and answer any key concept questions that might appear throughout your notes as well. Remember, you can replay any part of this presentation that you might need for help, assistance, or clarity. Let's get started. The principles of government. What does it take to actually make a government, and what does it take to actually make government run? Let's recap that a government is an institution through which a society makes and enforces its public policies. It is made up of those people who exercise its powers and all those who have authority to control over people. What are policies, though? Public policies are all the things a government decides to do. For example, taxation, defense, education, crime, healthcare, transportation, the environment, civil rights, working conditions, etc. When you think about all the things that government does do, they put forth policies in theory to help make things better for the people upon which they serve. So what are some basic powers of a government? Every government must have three basic powers to carry out public policies. A good government, anyway, should have the following three things. Legislative power, which is basically the power to make laws. Executive power, which is the power to enforce or administer the laws. And judicial power, which is the power to interpret laws and determine their meaning. Government also has a state. Now, before you get confused by the terminology, a state, in government terms, is just a body of people living in a defined territory, organized politically, and with the power to make and enforce laws without the consent of any high authority. We often call this a nation or a country. Here are some basic characteristics of a state: population, territory, sovereignty, which means having supreme and absolute power in its own territory, and a government. How did states emerge? Why do we need government? Well, there are four basic theories that have emerged as to why states emerged. Force theory, which is when one person or small group gained control over an area and forced all within it to submit to their rule. This theory implies that people were systematically forced to accept some type of institution of power or central force of rulership. Divine right of kings theory, which is the theory that God created the state, and God had given those of royal birth the right to rule. This theory suggests that people believe that government was divinely inspired and or that people who lead it have been divinely influenced to have control over the people. Evolutionary theory. A population formed from primitive families first, and then the heads of these families became government. This theory subscribes to the thought that government evolved from original families, and then over time, those people emerged as heads of government. And the social contract theory, which is the belief that a population in a given territory gave up as much power to a government as needed to promote the well-being of all. This theory basically subscribes to the school of thought that people realized that in order for society to function, they needed to give a little and take a little from government to make a society function. Which of the theories best describes the origin of the United States and why? Well, many people might say that it is in fact the social contract theory, where people realized that they needed some type of rules and structure to actually make society and government run, so they submit to government. They look to government for answers and leadership and authority. But at the same time, government also has a contract with the people. Government needs us. We vote. We put our public officials in place to make a government run. So what does government actually do? The purpose of the U.S. government specifically is set out to the preamble of the Constitution. The preamble basically says these few things. The government was created to form a more perfect union. Government was created to establish justice. Government is created to ensure domestic tranquility. Government was created to provide for a common defense. Government was created to promote general welfare of all people, Government was created to secure the blessings of liberty for all, and of course to establish and embellish patriotism, or the feeling of pride in one's people or country. If you ever get the chance to read the Constitution, or especially the preamble, all those things are in there that basically give us an introduction as to why we need government. How does the government serve the purposes set forth in the preamble of the Constitution? Provide an example of each. Well, let's go back and maybe talk this out. As you're aware, the Constitution set forth the rights and responsibilities for us as citizens. It tells us pretty clearly what we are able to do as a people in this country. When you think about our rights and responsibilities, some of those rights that we have, as outlined in the later parts of the Constitution, are established here in the preamble. When you think, for example, about securing the blessings of liberty, many people associate that to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. However, let's be clear about what this actually means. The Constitution basically is implying that every American citizen has the right to pursue their own happiness within the confines of the law, and of course keeping in mind the safety and betterment of others. Some of these other principles will be talked about later on when we get to the Constitution in full. But think about the Constitution for a second. This document basically gives us our structure and framework of government. Let's get into the main principles of government. There are a few, and I just want to make sure that we explain each of them in full with relative and pertinent examples. The first principle of government is popular sovereignty. So the question here is, who ultimately gets the power in a government? The idea is that the source of government comes from the consent of the governed, which is the people. This is the idea that people hold the power in a government. They exercise this power by voting. They exercise this power by expression. An example of this might be people in a country are not totally confident and sure about the course of the country in an election year. So people vote and exercise their right of expression to stay the course or make a change in their leadership to maybe yield better results. That's an example of popular sovereignty. Next is republicanism. What's the question here with this? Who gets to decide who rules in a government? The main idea of republicanism is that the right people need to be in charge of making decisions for the rest of us. So, what do? We elect representatives to make laws for us. We elect members of the House, the Senate, and the presidency to make sure that our lives are in fact in good hands. That's the essence of republicanism. An example of this would be maybe the people of a country are active and caring citizens, but they admit that they don't know at all about government affairs and policies and making politics. So they put people in office that they trust on behalf of themselves to make decisions. This diagram basically explains that. We, as an electorate, need to be as informed as possible to make sure that the people who represent us can go to government and make change for the countries upon which they serve. Next is checks and balances. What does this mean? How can we keep a branch of government from becoming too powerful? The idea is that we need to regulate and oversee all branches of government matters, to hold them accountable and to make sure that no one branch becomes too powerful. The principle of checks and balances just means that each branch of government has a way to limit the powers of the other two branches, but they also should in theory watch themselves too, as to not supersede or overstep their boundaries or powers as well. An example of this might be the President of the United States would like to see a certain set of laws passed on an issue that is really important to him or her, but they can't do it by themselves. As you see, they need Congress, and this law needs to be upheld by the courts once passed. So clearly government is not a one-man show, and in many ways, that's a good thing. Over here are just some of the many things that all three branches of government actually do. Number 4, limited government. The question here is, how much power is too much power in a government? The idea is that no government should be all-powerful, omniscient, and almighty. Everyone must follow the law, and no government should be all too powerful. What does this look like in terms of an example? Well, let's just say, for example, that people believe that government is imposing a lot of harsh restrictions during the pandemic, but people are willing to abide by the rules as to create a just and orderly society. They keep a watchful eye on government, though, and they make sure it doesn't step over its boundaries and infringe on the rights of the people. So what do? They stay informed, they research, they develop their ideas, and they advocate for their rights whenever they feel like they're being taken away. Let us realize, though, that no government would not be a good thing either. Next is individual rights. How can individuals live in a government and still be free? Each person should have certain inalienable rights. This means that citizens are given unalienable rights that cannot be taken away without a trial. The beauty of living in a democracy is that people vote for their representatives, yes, but they also have a say in their democracy by advocating for their rights. A great example of this would be people in the United States want to see if they can advocate for rights of unborn babies, and so they protest against abortions. They can lobby, petition, protest, like I stated, for greater awareness and action on this issue by their elected officials. This would be a great example of individual rights because people believe that all people have rights at all parts of their life, and that all life should be respected. Next is the separation of powers. Who does what in a government? The thought here and the idea is that we allocate duties and responsibilities so that no one source has to do it all, because no one source should do it all. The central government is separated into 3 branches, and each have different jobs but equal power. The legislative is lawmakers, the executive enforces the laws, and the judicial just judges the laws and they view them. I think probably one of the best things about our government in particular is that we have the ability to look at these types of branches of government and really see what they're doing. And in a way, our government is really transparent. And we can understand when everything is functioning correctly, and when something seems to be going wrong, we can keep a helpful and watchful eye over it, like a watchdog, to make sure that we sound the alarm and act accordingly. A real-world example of this could be the fact that the U.S. Congress would like to see if they can change a part of the U.S. Constitution and maybe add or take away an amendment. Okay, so if they want to do this, a long process would ensue of judicial review, and of course votes by all levels of government must take place before it becomes a new law or an amendment. Things can't change overnight. And, in many ways, that's a good thing. Number 7 is federalism. Here's the question: what level of government acts on certain issues at certain times? The idea is that different levels of government are active and have powers for certain roles at certain times. There are different levels of government that make up layers of our society. Federal, state, local, they all have powers, and at times they all share powers. But each has their own roles that they can fulfill at certain times. Believe me? Let's look at a real-world example right now. Let's just say that certain parts of our country are impacted heavily by a natural disaster. What do? The answer is that different layers of government are enacted, and they can and will do different things to assist and help out. There are certain special powers and roles that are activated and carried out in certain times. As you guys can see, there are many principles of government that make it run and function. Without these principles, our government and democracy would not be the way that it is. So at this time, please continue filling out your notes and answer any key concept questions that might have come up along the way. And remember to move on to the next parts and complete them accordingly. Thank you.